welcome to another edition of the Simsbury Woman. My name is Shannon Knall, and I'm so glad that you joined us today. Today we will be talking about brain injury, as March is Brain Injury Awareness Month. And I'm so lucky to have two Simsbury residents here with me today to discuss brain injury. From the Connecticut Brain Injury Alliance, I have Executive Director Julie Peters and Carrie Kramer, who is the Brain Injury Service Director. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so glad you were able to make it. So let's talk about Brain Injury Awareness Month. Let's kind of back up a little bit and first explain the mission of the Brain Injury Alliance.
We have been in existence for over 30 years, and our mission is to be Connecticut's partner in brain injury prevention and recovery. So two aspects of brain injuries.
Okay, and how do you see that, how do you implement that? How does your mission expand into the work that you do every day?
Certainly, as a resource in recovery, we have a toll-free helpline that provides resources, supports for individuals with brain injuries, their family members, the professionals who support them, and we get about 4,000 contacts a year through that helpline.
Oh, wow.
We also have support groups. We have 30 support groups throughout the state, and each one of them has a little bit different character and to meet the needs of the individuals who go to them. So there may be one that is for employed individuals with brain injuries, because sometimes the issues that you face when you're trying to work and your colleagues may not know you have a brain injury is a little bit different from someone else. And we have ones for caregivers, we have support groups for veterans, because a lot of times their issues are a little bit different. So that's primarily the resource and that we have for individuals and their family members. And then the other part, because brain injury, the only cure for a brain injury is prevention. So the prevention work we do is really essential as well. And so we do a lot of community outreach. Last year we reached over 8,000 people through community presentations, school presentations, to educate them about ways to prevent brain injuries from occurring. And then on the other hand, we also are the experts on brain injuries. So we have an annual conference that kicked off Brain Injury Awareness Month.
Great. Was
our professional conference that professionals can get together and learn the latest information about brain injuries in terms of research and services and that type of thing. And also we go into workplaces and train people who are working with individuals with brain injuries in terms of the kinds of issues they may be facing and that type of thing.
Okay, and I'd like to get back to that particular piece a little bit later in our interview, but first I'd really like to know why both of you have chosen this as a profession. I feel like there's always a story behind things that people do, so I'd be curious to know why you've chosen this as your
Well, that's
career.
Very interesting. So my background is in nonprofit management. I had been in Utah, the director of the National Association of Social Workers, the Utah chapter. And I moved here about 11 years ago, really looking for a nonprofit position. And I remember seeing the advertisement for the position, and I knew nothing about brain injuries. And in fact, I almost didn't apply because I thought, how can they need a full-time person running this organization? Because truly, you know, I never thought I knew anyone with a brain injury, never really came across it. So I applied, and they were in real need of somebody with the management background that I had. So I was fortunate enough to get the job. And, you know, then I had a huge learning curve because I knew all about nonprofits, but really nothing about brain injuries. And I remember that it, you know, I went out and I did my little dog and pony show about what we do and all the services we have. And it wasn't until the first event that I went to, which is a retreat that we have for survivors, that for many individuals who live either with their families or in institutions, it's really the only opportunity for kind of a vacation that they ever get. And I remember being with a young survivor, and it was early in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, and we're standing out on the deck, and I looked to him and I said, "Don't you just hate getting up in the morning?" And he said, "You know, I used to, And then I didn't wake up for 3 months. And at that moment, I think it became more of a passion than a job. And learning about and meeting these individuals with brain injuries who never thought this was going to happen to them, who never, they woke up one day and yesterday they, they had their job, they had their family, whatever it was, and today they wake up and it's a completely different world for them. And so that's when it became not a job anymore. It really became my passion, and I feel very fortunate to have worked there for the last 10 years, and it's really close to my heart.
Good, good. So for you, it wasn't necessarily a background, but it was a certain point in time that has sustained you now.
Correct.
For the rest of your career path. Carrie, how about you?
We're on opposite ends of the spectrum a bit. So I went to graduate school to become a rehabilitation counselor. And my role as a rehabilitation counselor is to work with all kinds of individuals with various challenges and different levels of ability, and some that have some disabilities. And so one of my first jobs was in the brain injury day treatment program at a major hospital in New York. And although I was exposed to working with all kinds of individuals, the minute I started working with those that had brain injury, things changed for me. It was just absolutely amazing for me to see some of the significant challenges that people had to overcome and what happened to families after a brain injury, and the resiliency of brain injury survivors to keep moving forward even though their lives had changed so significantly.
Wow.
So I had that experience, and I knew that this was the population that I wanted to work with. And interestingly enough, as a blessing and a curse, I think, in many ways, many years after I was working as a professional in the brain injury community, my dad had a massive stroke. So I became a family member and a caregiver and a professional all at the same time.
Wow.
So that's really afforded me a unique opportunity to see so many different aspects of what it's like to have someone with a brain injury in your life.
Right. So how long have you been doing what you do?
I've been at BIAC for 7 years.
Okay. Wow. Interesting stories from both of you. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for people to understand that it isn't just a job, that it is really a passion that you have to live day in and day out. So that's good to hear. So let's talk about brain injuries and how do we define that? What does a person with a brain injury present as? I imagine there's a spectrum of symptoms, if you will, but tell me a little bit about that.
Acquired brain injury is typically the umbrella term for any kind of brain injury. And then within that umbrella term, there's a lot of other types of brain injuries. So there are all kinds of ways that someone can have a brain injury. Often we don't think about strokes as a brain injury, but in fact, for example, a stroke is a brain injury. An anoxic injury is one where there's not oxygen to the brain. If someone's in a situation, for example, a drowning, a near drowning incident, that's a type of brain injury. Drug overdoses are brain injuries. Concussions are brain injuries. You can fall and hit your head. That's a potential brain injury. And then there's also motor vehicle accidents, individuals that are pedestrians that are hit, assault, gunshots. There's all different types of brain injuries. So when we think about acquired brain injury, though, it's usually a brain injury that you acquire after birth, so it's not a degenerative disease or something that you're born with, and that's really the distinguisher between acquired brain injury and other types of injuries.
Okay, so then when we're looking at treatment, we're looking at it in a huge gamut of
Absolutely.
Of how we get at this issue. So where do you start?
Well, I think it's interesting to talk a little bit about classification because 20, 30 years ago, people often didn't survive their brain injuries, and there's been so many medical advances since then. But the way it used to be classified was mild, moderate, severe, and you fell within a spectrum. And at the Brain Injury Alliance of Connecticut, what we often say is there's no mild brain injury. Even if you have a concussive injury, what happens to you, even if it's a temporary challenge or disability, it's not mild. There's nothing mild about that experience. So we've really moved away from that classification, and we look at brain injury still on a spectrum, but at least within BIAC, we try to not use that classification because we find that it pigeonholes someone. So as it relates to treatment, you're absolutely right, Shannon. It runs the gamut.
Right.
So a concussive injury would be treated potentially very differently than someone that sustains a severe traumatic brain injury.
Wow. So from a preventative perspective, let's backtrack a little bit. What can we do to prevent brain injury so we don't take that next step?
Well, because number one, motor vehicle crashes are one of the top ways that you can sustain a brain injury. It's very important to wear your seatbelt, avoid distracted driving. We have a law in Connecticut that
Yes, we do.
you can't use your handheld phone or text while driving, yet still I think a lot of people do that. Never getting into the car with someone who's been drinking and driving. Those are ways that in terms of motor vehicles. Helmet use. Studies have shown that there's an 85% less chance of sustaining a brain injury if you're injured wearing a helmet while biking, for instance, and using the appropriate helmet for the appropriate activity. And something that a lot of parents don't realize is that you sometimes to get your child to wear a helmet, you might want to encourage them to decorate their helmet or something like that. But actually, you should never do that because a helmet needs to be able to slide on impact. So you want to have that helmet free of anything that's going to keep it from sliding.
That's good to
So
know.
helmet use is very important.
I've been noticing my kids just started skiing, and now helmets are required for skiing as well, which seems like it completely makes sense, but it's rather newer to
It is. I used to live in Utah. I was an avid skier, never wore a helmet, never thought about it.
Right.
And yet we are realizing just how important helmet use is there. And the other thing that's kind of amazes me sometimes is that we put the helmets on the kids and then we don't model the behavior ourselves.
Right.
And in order for your kids to really truly understand the importance of it, you have to be doing it as well.
Right.
You may be a great bicyclist and you may be thinking, well, I'm not going on the roads, I'm going on the trail, but it doesn't matter. You should always be wearing that helmet for whatever the activity that is needed for.
Great point. Very good point. I think I interrupted you actually with your, you were talking about wearing helmets while biking and the importance of making sure that your helmet fits appropriately, is not decorated or anything like that. Are there any statistics about people in Connecticut, for instance, who are affected by a brain injury, and do you have any information about how they have become injured?
Sure. It's estimated that 22,000 Connecticut residents will either die, visit emergency rooms, or be hospitalized from a brain injury every year. Wow. So it's a huge number. Now, the vast majority of people will recover with very little, if any, long-term disability as a result. However, there are so many precautions and things we need to take in terms of that treatment process, and that's one of the, I think, the ongoing issues we have in terms of getting enough rehabilitation for a brain injury and getting it paid for and that type of thing. So but it's one of those things that you never think about until it happens to you or a loved one. And most people don't, if you say, do you know anyone with a brain injury? Well, really, no. But then if you think about it, well, yes, the captain of my son's football team, he sustained a couple of different concussions, or, oh, my father had a stroke, or something like that, where you don't think about it, and you don't think about those changes that are going to occur because of that.
Right. And you bring up an interesting point. There's been a lot in the news lately about professional athletes and brain injury, and how that has led to sort of these pivotal moments in their lives where they have been in crisis or have taken really drastic action. So have you been working to educate people on that issue as well? How has that evolved, and how has that in fact affected what you do?
Well, certainly. And I think concussions are everyone's hearing a lot more about it now. And I think there are many more dangers than we ever thought before, and there are many more things that people need to do and be aware of. We know that, you know, football's not going to go away tomorrow,
no.
and people are going to be playing soccer and that type of thing. But I think the importance to families is the taking the proper precautions, especially having to do with concussions. And if your child or you've seen a person who has either been in a situation where a concussion could have occurred, you see something, they hit their head, they hit their body, or you see they have any of the signs or symptoms of a concussion, then it's really, really important to follow the protocols.
Okay, so 2 years ago, Connecticut passed a law regarding concussions. Talk about what that law is and how we see it in action today.
I just want to say we were thrilled actually to have an opportunity to be a partner in writing that legislation and crafting that, and we were the third state to do it. So it's nice when Connecticut moves forward with a big initiative and is on the forefront of that.
That is, yes. Congratulations.
So, thank you.
That's big.
It was
a lot of work.
It was a lot of work, but it's so important. And so basically, as it stands right now, if a concussion is suspected, then the coach needs to pull that player out of the sport, and that child cannot go back to that sport until they're medically cleared.
Okay.
And there's a few different variations of who can clear that student athlete. So it can be a athletic trainer,
okay,
an MD, or an APRN.
Okay.
And so those are the three categories of professionals that can clear that athlete to return to play. It becomes a little complicated for parents, I think, because when you think about a specialist, you think, who would a specialist be that could treat a concussion? And most often people think that it would be a neurologist that would know the most, or even their family pediatrician.
Right.
But the truth is that not every medical professional is an expert in concussion management. And so it really, the onus is on that family and that parent to really find out who the proper medical concussion management expert is and make sure that their child is seen by someone who really is properly versed in concussion management.
And so how long can that recovery take? It varies per person, I would imagine?
It does, and what we like to say in the brain injury community is if you've met one person with a brain injury, you've met one person with a brain injury.
Right.
For a lot of different reasons, everyone heals at different rates and has different time frames. But a typical concussive injury should resolve itself within 7 to 10 days.
Oh, okay.
So you would still potentially be experiencing concussion symptoms, but it would resolve on its own between 7 to 10 days.
Okay.
There is a group of individuals, however, for a variety of different reasons, and some of the research has shown for kids that have ADHD, for example, or have a history of migraines, they're more at risk for developing long-term consequences for that concussive injury, and their healing time might be a longer period of time.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, do you work with families at this point? Because, as you said, the onus is on them to really understand and educate themselves about what these issues are and what to look for in the recovery period. So how do you work with them?
That's a great question. So Julie had referenced earlier that we, one of the things that we do is we're a resource for families and professionals and brain injury survivors in the community. So we actually operate a helpline. Right. And the helpline is available during our regular business hours, and family members often call the helpline and talk to us. They have erroneous information about concussions to begin with. They find our organization's name, they contact us, and they're really surprised when we give them often contrary feedback to what they've thought about concussive injuries or heard about concussive injuries. So we steer them in the right direction with a lot of very valuable information.
Interesting. And that probably goes back to what you were talking about how not every medical person is an expert on concussive care.
Right.
So that's a whole different level of education and awareness that you all are doing for
Exactly.
affected families, which is...
And we often will tell a family member, even without providing community contacts for them, if they're most comfortable with their pediatrician or their family practitioner, to just have an honest dialogue with their primary care provider and ask questions. Are you familiar with concussive injuries? How are you managing kids currently in the practice that have concussions? If they don't feel that that's an area of expertise that their family practice doctor is familiar with, then they should go outside that network and really seek the advice and support from someone that really knows. There are a lot of myths also about concussive injuries, so I wanted to mention one of the biggest myths is that you have to lose consciousness to sustain a concussion, and that's not true, and in most cases you don't lose consciousness. And another myth that we often bump up against, especially with parents, is that it has to be a hit to your head to sustain a concussion. It's any jolt or blow to the body.
Really?
And it's the force of that jolt or blow to the body that results in a concussion potentially.
Wow.
So it's not just about hitting your head.
Right.
And that's a message we'd like to get to the community.
That is definitely a myth that is out there. I thought that myself. I mean, that I think is probably what the general population thinks as well, so that's important. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Getting back to legislation for a little bit, now that we have this law on the books, is there anything that you'd like to see Connecticut do in addition to this? I'm sure there's a whole wide range of legislative issues that you'd like to tackle, but let's talk about maybe 3 that you see as critical next steps.
With the concussion legislation, one of the challenges is that it only is required in the public schools. So what would be really nice is to be able to expand it to community sports programs and to private schools and such. So that would be one. The other one is that we were not able to get, as part of the initial legislation, the requirement that parents sign a document that says that they've read it, the information, because part of this is that information is provided to players and such, but it would be good to have something, because we all know, it's how does that information get home to parents? Did they ever see that, that type of thing? And just so that parents, because so oftentimes it's surprising, but it's the uneducated parent that can become the problem on the sidelines, for instance. Johnny's playing for scholarship money and Johnny's fine, he's not showing anything, I think Johnny should go back into the game. Or, not understanding the need for the rest of the brain when they're recovering from a concussion, that type of thing. So to know that the family would have that, I think is another thing that we'd like to see in terms of concussion legislation. We're very happy at the beginning of it, but I think there's many ways we could improve it and strengthen it.
Of course. And I think as we were discussing off camera, it's important that you have a foundation on which to build, that you now have this, and Connecticut has laid the groundwork for what needs to be done, but it's important to keep building on it and as I'm sure you do, advocating for additional changes. So you're both to be commended for your hard work on that. And the state of Connecticut did the right thing, so
absolutely
good for us. I do want to talk a little bit about what you're doing this month to recognize Brain Injury Awareness Month. Do you have any special initiatives that you're working on or have worked on?
Well, the conference was our kickoff, and we're also doing Art on the Move, which is asking brain injury survivors or other individuals who want to produce pieces of artwork about brain injury or about a brain injury survivor to donate that artwork to us, and we are going to be having kind of a roaming art show.
Fun.
We had our first art show a few years ago, and I remember thinking, we'll be lucky if we get 3 or 4 or 5 pieces of art, and we got more than 20, and it was just so inspiring because so oftentimes we think of someone's disability.
Right.
And in this way we could celebrate abilities.
Right.
And just everything from poems to sculpture to paintings, all kinds of things. And so we're really excited about that, and a lot of information about that and other activities that we're doing this month. We're partnering with a number of different organizations on Blue Jeans Days and community
Great.
fundraisers. Hoffman Auto Group is donating a percentage of every car they sell to the Brain Injury Alliance of Connecticut.
Good.
So,
well, we will put up the website on the
Wonderful.
screen for some information. And just to kind of wrap up today, what can we do as a community to support people and families who have been affected by brain injuries?
I think, number one, as I indicated before, I think as parents, modeling correct behavior, and also understanding what it's like to have a brain injury. And I think Carrie can talk a little bit more about that.
Brain injury is so impacting to the person who experiences it and to the family and to the friends of their loved one. And I think as a community, we really have an obligation to support families as they're going through that experience, especially individuals that are recovering from very severe traumatic brain injuries that require hospitalization and rehabilitation services. After that kind of experience, a child or a loved one may be different.
Right.
And when you think about what the brain is, it controls every aspect of our being, from our breathing to our vision, to our personality, to our emotion. And so after brain injury, some of those things tend to change. And it's really hard for those around that person to find the person they know in the changed person and accept them and love them and continue to support them. It's a very challenging process. So as a community, I think if we can support those families, rally around them, and to make sure that they feel supported and that their child, especially children that are at school age, when they come back into the fold of school, to treat them as they were treated before, as friends and as partners, and to have fun and to not look at them differently.
And so that means that we need to educate ourselves as well. So we need to take some time to learn about what brain injury is.
Absolutely.
Well, I thank you both for being here with me today. I think this is a really important discussion, and I wish you continued success on your legislative issues and your education and awareness agendas. I think it's important, and you're doing a great job. So keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us here on the Simsbury Woman, and we will see you again next month.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.